This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're joined in the studio by the Canadian Consul General in New York, Tom Clark, who's visiting Albany this week as part of their annual Canada Day program. So we're going to talk about New York-Canadian relations. Welcome back to the show, Tom.
Great to be here.
So while you're meeting with New York policymakers like legislative leaders, and I imagine either the governor or her team, what types of asks are you making, and does the wish list in 2026 look demonstrably different than the past?
I wouldn't say it's demonstrably different, but I'd say there's a new urgency to it that wasn't there perhaps last year. What we've seen over the past year has accelerated everything. And so there's a couple of things that we're facing, both New York and Canada are facing right now, that is creating this urgency. Number one is the review and the reauthorization of the USMCA, the trade pact between our two countries. And then the other one, of course, is the ongoing story of the tariffs and what that's doing to New York businesses, what it's doing to affordability in New York, and so on. And, of course, that's mirrored in Canada at the same time. So if there's an ask, and I would put it out to anybody who's listening, is we've got to all speak up in favor of these agreements that bring prosperity and jobs to New Yorkers, to Canadians, and so on. We've got to let the people in charge know that this is a big deal for all of us. And it makes, it provides hope for young people, it provides comfort for families, and it provides a certain amount of comfort for retirement. I mean, these are the basic things in life. So, yeah, that's the ask, is speak up for those arrangements between Canada and New York that give us this prosperity and give us this hope.
So what you're talking about is having New York policymakers exert their soft power, their ability to influence what's happening in D.C. as opposed to maybe more substantive actions that they can take, since state policymakers don't control the tariffs at the federal level. But are there any things that you're looking for out of this legislature? Are there bills related to activities, say, in the North Country, or maybe spending in the budget on the border security that you're talking about with leaders as well?
I think all of that is sort of in the future, but we're talking about it now. Give you one example. Critical minerals. Oddly, to use the same word, it's critical for New York. It's critical for us. We're a superpower when it comes to energy and critical minerals. What we need now is ways to get those rocks out of the ground and then to process them so that they turn into the materials that we need to go into the new economy. So in speaking with the governor and speaking with other legislative leaders around here, I've brought this up and I've said, look, what can we do together between New York and Canada when we're looking at either the mining of or the processing of critical minerals? And we have got proof of concept of this already. If you take a look at the Albany to Bromont, Quebec corridor for semiconductors, that's in existence. What's called the CHIPI, which is that huge extension cord coming from Quebec down to New York City, delivering 20% of their power. That, again, is a cross-border initiative. And so I think that what we're looking at now is not a project that's on the table that we can say, here's what it looks like. But we are at the stage of saying, what can we do together in these areas that we all need to go to? And the fact of the matter is, between New York and Canada, we got everything we need. We don't need anything from around the world to do this. We just need the will to get it done.
Well, sticking with that power energy relationship between New York and Canada, when you and I talked in February of last year, we talked about that effort to have that 330-plus mile transmission line from the Quebec area into New York City, and how that was potentially in danger of being disrupted by federal actions in D.C. And this was a project that was expected to be operational in 2026. We're now in 2026. Are we past the point where actions at the federal level can jeopardize this project, or should New Yorkers still be worried about the reliability of this power source based on what might be happening in D.C.?
No need to worry.
Okay.
This thing is done. They flipped the switch. I think it's in May. I don't know the exact date, but I think it's in May they flipped the switch. And at that point, that line will provide power to the equivalent of 1 million homes in New York. if you look at the size of the power that's coming down. Look, anything can happen. I mean, we've
learned that.
We've learned that, right? So there's no guarantees on anything, but from everything that I know, and I talk a lot to the Hydro-Quebec people who are putting in this line, the line is done, it's on budget, it's on time, and they just need to flip the switch.
Another thing to note is when you and I talked in February of last year, it was in the wake of a new leadership transition in our country. You and I are now talking, having gone through your own leadership transition in Canada. How, if at all, do you anticipate that impacting Canadian-New York relations, or do you not anticipate any sort of deviation from Prime Minister Carney and his predecessor?
Two levels to this answer. Number one level is, yeah, there's going to be an effect, and New Yorkers have already seen it. Especially in upstate New York, the number of Canadians coming down for holidays or shopping trips or whatever has diminished dramatically in the past few months. And I don't sense that that is changing anytime soon. I mean, Canadians are very, very upset right now, and they feel that they are under attack. They feel that their best friend has just punched them in the nose, and they don't know why. The second level, though, to that question is something more fundamental about the relations, people-to-people relations between New York and Canada. I mean, we go back hundreds of years. We're in each other's kitchens. No trade attack on Canada is going to change the fundamentals of that. So let's put these two levels together. What you end up with then is a really challenging situation that has ignited feelings in Canada, coupled with a long-standing relationship between the peoples. You put those two things together and you begin to see how we can get out of this valley or out of this snowbank that we're stuck in right now. We're not there next week. We're not there a month from now. But I think that the fundamentals are there that we can lean back on between New York and Canada and say that at least that's not going to change. Right? I mean, continental drift doesn't happen that quickly. You're not about to drift off into the Pacific, and we're not going to drift off into the Atlantic. We're still going to be neighbors. We'll still wave at each other over the fence. So that will endure. The other part of it is going to be trickier.
Why?
Well, because we have no control over it. We can control what we can control, and that is the new direction of the Canadian government. We're doing things within Canada to make our lot better in life, tearing down trade barriers between the provinces, which is frankly something that should have been done decades ago, but there was never sort of a reason to do it. But that's liberated about $13 billion in GDP just within the country. Then we're diversifying trade. It's not that we're going to stop trading with the United States. It's not that we're going to diminish our trade with the United States, but we want to double our non-U.S. trade in the next 10 years because we don't want to be as reliant as we have been in the past on the U.S. We've got to spread our wings a little bit and create more legs to the table that we're standing on. So that's the direction that we're moving.
Will anything that's happening at the federal level potentially jeopardize the agreement that was struck late last year between the governor and Canada with regards to nuclear power and efforts to find ways to partner there, including, leaning on the expertise that you guys have as New York looks to expand its nuclear footprint?
From our point of view, we want to do everything we can to make sure all that stuff happens. We don't have an argument with the state of New York. That's not in our line of sight. So what we do want to do with New York is continue, especially in the nuclear area, because Ontario has a lot of expertise in that area. We're, as you know, we're doubling down on our nuclear, but also there's wind power being built in Quebec and Nova Scotia, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is also going to be part of sort of the whole energy grid for the northeastern part of the United States and Canada. So in that regard, I think that work continues. But again, we're not in charge of this. We're not the ones putting out the press releases and deciding that we're going to tariff you 100% on Monday and maybe not 100% on Tuesday. That's not our gig. That's not what we do.
And Coming back to the idea of visitors from Canada into New York, that's been pretty well documented, not just recently, but in 2025 more broadly. Is there anything that New York policymakers can do on that front to make New York more attractive, or is this speak to that soft power issue and more about the sentiments than maybe the pocketbook calculations people might make?
Yeah, I think you're right. This movement grew up organically in Canada. This is not government led or anything like that. The idea of not going to the States, or lots of Canadians who have properties, for example, in Florida, or selling their properties in Florida to get out. But that's all organic. And I think that, again, when we move out of this snowbank that we're in right now, it is going to be that same organic messaging that is going to get people back. Look, one thing I say when I talk to Canadians, I said there are two things that are absolutely true. Number one is that at any given moment, there are more Americans who think like Canadians than there are Canadians. The second thing that's fundamentally true that I tell Canadians is that there are tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans who are still the warmest, most generous people on the face of the planet. Our fight is not with the average American. We're perhaps a little mystified as to how they vote sometimes. But look, the attack that is coming at us is not coming from people who live in New York State, upstate or downstate. So I think that the way we get back to being in each other's kitchens is just talking, forgetting the noise, just turn off your phones and just talk to one another. Stop reading X, stop reading Truth Social, at least for enough time that you can have a real conversation with somebody. That's how we get back.
Any reaction to the deployment of federal immigration officials throughout America? I mean, when you see what is happening in this country, does that raise any alarm bells for you?
You're not going to be happy with my answer. Having said that, I'll give you the answer. That is an issue for America and Americans to figure out. We watch it. We are keenly aware of what's going on. We look at it more in terms, if we have a sort of any actionable response to it, we look at our borders and is the border strong enough to manage movements that may happen. And by that, I'm not suggesting for a minute that there's going to be some sort of, mass immigration or something like that. It's just a very good time for us to reflect on how we are managing the best managed border in the world, and whether we are up to the task of, moments where things are not going exactly swimmingly. But in terms of the actual deployment in the American cities and how that's all going, that is something for Americans to figure out and Americans to solve.
Well, we've been speaking with Tom Clark. He is the Canadian Consul General here in New York. Tom, thank you so much for visiting us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
This is always a highlight for me. Thanks very much.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.